Well, good afternoon, Portfolia members and guests. I'm Trish Costello. I'm the CEO and founder of Portfolia, and I'm so thrilled today to have with us Dr. Dina Radenkovic, who is the CEO and one of the co-founders of Gameto. And what an exciting hour we have for you today. Gameto is, as you will see, one of the most exciting, transformative, science-forward reproductive health companies, I think, out there today. And it's not just the reproductive health. There's even more to this platform that you're going to learn about today. And I just see it as such a visionary opportunity, and will really shift how we think about our lives, our fertility, and perhaps even our longevity. Before we jump in and get to know more about Dina, let me tell you that Gameto and Dina really are our first investment in our new Women's Health Fund 4. And we were so thrilled about Gameto that even though we had not yet launched the fund officially and had not taken in any money, we thought it was so compelling that we made the investment on behalf of the fund and warehoused it for you so that we wouldn't miss the timing opportunity, and you all in Women's Health Fund 4 would have an equity position in Gameto and the future that Dina and Gameto is bringing to us. So we're really pleased with that. And I'll also tell you that Women's Health Fund 4, it has now hit the numbers for its first closing. So we will be doing the first close for the Women's Health Fund 4. There's still space for additional investors, but that's where we're at. And with Gameto, we also have Your Choice, the first male birth control pill. So 2 companies already in Women's Health Fund 4 that really are just at the frontier of healthcare. And Brittany, I know you'll be dropping in some links and all as we go. Now, it's been a little while since we've done a founder's journey. What I want to remind you is that we have an opportunity for over this next hour to go deep into what's happening with Gameto, the vision, the future of this amazing platform, and hear a little bit about Dina's background as well. I want you to all feel free to jump in with your questions, either in chat or in the Q&A. I'll be watching those as we go and pulling some of those in as Dina's talking. And then we'll have a little bit of time toward the end for your open Q&A. But don't be shy about jumping in right at the beginning. I'll be watching those with my team. So let's go ahead and get started. Dina, welcome to Founder's Journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on the first close of your new fund.
Thank you so much. Well, we created the first venture capital fund in women's health in 2018, and we've now made our 47th investment. So we're the most active investor in women's health in the US, certainly, and perhaps in the world. So, Dina, tell us. Well, before we jump into Gameto, and there's so much exciting news there, but tell us a little bit about yourself first, and what brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I obviously don't want to take too much time about my personal journey because I'm so excited about all of the stuff that we have built and what we're actively building. But it's sometimes good to set up the scene. So I'm a medical doctor by background. I was originally born in Serbia, in South Serbia to be precise. Always enjoyed STEM fields, and actually, as I think I told you, my father was a professor of embryology. So even in kind of niche in Serbia, I was playing around with placental villi and a lot like fell in love with embryology. And then went to a lot of STEM competitions across levels. I finished school early, won some scholarships, went into the United Kingdom. I trained as a physician at University College London. Decided very early I want to do medicine because it felt like a perfect combination of science and the impact that I can have on the society and also human interactions. Really thought that like innovating in medicine is always going to be my calling. But again, where I come from, like the biotechnology industry or the entrepreneurial, the venture world doesn't really exist. So I was for the first time exposed to that community in the UK. In my second year of medical school, after finishing second year of medical school, I actually participated at the Founders Forum, so Brent Hoberman's accelerator, and it was called the F Factor. It was supposed to be like the X Factor for STEM, so it was kind of Eric Schmidt and Richard Branson and Simon Cowell combined. And that's where I first like learned the world of venture capital. So I had this idea of making a program for gestational diabetes. So that is for women who develop diabetes in pregnancy, as a digital therapeutics program because women in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, while still getting universal free healthcare, were only seen once at that 6 weeks postpartum check, and most of them weren't able to attend. And then a lot of women would then develop type 2 diabetes, and I felt that it could be a transformative life way to help women. Help prevent type 2 diabetes. And during that time was when I really realized, and the people I've met from there, that building in kind of the area of science is what I really, really enjoy. And I've learned the world's like venture capital, and then started working with venture funds and in companies and entrepreneurs and CEOs, and suddenly felt like I fit in somewhere. I was like, oh my God, these people are like me. They like things moving all the time. They like to work on hundreds of different problems every day. And I finished medicine, I finished residency. I was working throughout my degree and education on research. I was building things. I built like a software that we collaborated with and licensed into the industry. And then after I finishing my residency, really went into the entrepreneurial career. So I was one of the co-founders of Hook Research Clinics. After exiting the business, I left clinical medicine, moved to the United States, became a partner at Salt, where we raised an early stage life sciences fund, as well as we're doing late stage investments, and was in charge of science content curation for the Salt events. And then I kept my research post at King's College London, and then got one at the Buck Institute for Research and Aging. And then really by looking at kind of science, of a health prevention, where like how can we leverage technology to like feel better for longer, did I become obsessed with female reproductive longevity, because I felt that we've already been living longer for most of the time over the past few decades, but the age at which we lose our female reproductive longevity has remained static. And that if nobody addresses that, we're kind of worsening already the root causes of inequality, gender inequality in our society. And the other thing that was fascinating to me is that ovaries were these organs that just age faster than the rest of the human body, and that the ovarian biology is not preserved across humans and other species that we routinely use for modeling. So it felt that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit science that we've just never really discovered. And not only that, but I was like, okay, if you have to build a company, you need good science, right? You need to have a big enough problem, but also need to be a good business. But I did feel that actually solving meaningful problems for women can be a great business. And I think in particular, we're seeing that now with our lead asset in fertility, especially as we're getting kind of already regulatory approvals in certain jurisdictions, and starting to grow. But also beyond that, right? Like I think we're finally recognizing, and you were a visionary, obviously, to recognize that much earlier. But I think it's becoming more mainstream that actually treating half of the population and solving their problems should be a meaningful problem to solve, and then rewards will come. And that's how Gameto really came about, to solve that vision of providing better scientific-based solutions for women throughout their journey, starting with infertility, but looking at other conditions affecting the reproductive system, menopause, and then beyond. Because as you said, menopause is not just kind of loss of reproductive age. For majority of women, they care less about the loss of reproduction, but it's more about the long-term health and compression of morbidity that one can do by targeting some of those pathways that are activated after menopause.
Hmm. And you were talking about both your experience, so your medical training, science and research and venture capital. So you've really have so many parts of this equation when we're looking at, the ability to launch and grow and commercialize and really get these new treatments out to the public. You've raised $127 million, is it, Dina?
Yeah, so far since Gameto, we have $127 million of capital. 10 million from that was non-dilutive funding from ARPA H, and then the rest from venture capitalists. So obviously, Portfolia is our investor, Insight Partners, RA Capital, Future Ventures, Two Sigma, Bold, Lux Capital. Those kind of as our main big investors.
A lot of the investors that we invest with in some of our other companies, but I love that you have, significant resources to really get this into market. And it's really a platform play, as you're saying. Can you give us kind of tell us again what Gameto is, what it's doing, and kind of describe that full platform for us?
Yes, absolutely. So I guess let's start from first principles, right? As I've mentioned, the way we experience ovarian aging is not really present in other animal species. Some people argue it's only present in humans and four types of whales. There are some controversies that maybe it happens in primates in captivity. But essentially, I think that what is very important to note is that mice don't menstruate. And then, like other animals we use for research don't experience menopause the way we do. So, what does that mean? It means that, the lack of women's health treatments and the lack of women's health biopharma is has been a bit of a chicken and egg scenario of like, oh well, there's not like funding in big pharma companies and not big research and great, but on the other hand, there's also not great science and there's no good models to test it. And we know in pharma that even when there's a lot of money poured, if unless you have good models to understand the biology and to rapidly test things, you're not going to have good treatments, right? So it's not just that there was obviously some societal neglect of some of the importance of these conditions, and also like an increase in kind of female voice. A lot of what was done was positive that helped the field of breaking taboos, right? Like women are now openly talking about menopause and the symptoms, whereas 20 years ago it was much more of a taboo. Even infertility was a big taboo, right? Like most people will open and say, yeah, I've just done IVF, right? Whereas I have people who, even like joined Gameto and were like, oh my God, when I had the child with IVF, I wasn't really talking to people about it, right? So I think like that has helped certainly. But the other area where we were coming in was around, okay, how can we solve this problem? Is that we don't understand human ovaries and we don't have good models to understand them. So Gameto leverages this Nobel Prize winning technology breakthrough of Yamanaka, but basically the entire field of that induced pluripotent stem cell biology, which was given a Nobel Prize in 2012. And it means that we can convert stem cells, so induced pluripotent stem cells. We only work with induced pluripotent stem cells. And we make them into the different cells of the ovaries. So what I always say, Gameto is like an ovary in a dish platform company. It's like a young ovary company, and it's not just young ovaries, right? Because then we can have aged ovaries, we can have ovaries with different diseases, we can put ovaries next to the uterus and like mimic endometriosis, but we can make like synthetic ovaroids, we call them, because they're an organoid of an ovary that is derived from synthetic cells, but it looks and behaves like a human ovary in the lab. And we have published that beats previous animal chimeric models to study female reproductive system. And we have shown with primary tissue. So we had this collaboration with organ donors who were organ donors, and we were getting ovaries, right? Like you transplant livers or hearts, but you don't transplant ovaries. And we're getting that ovaries of women of different ages. And we compared with the primary tissue and showed that our ovaries really mimic that biology. So that allows us to, in a proprietary way, rapidly test and develop novel treatments. And our lead asset, I mean, Fertila, right? Like, which is this cryovial of engineered support cells that matures eggs outside of the body and shortens IVF and egg freezing, and it simplifies it for a whole group of patients. Bring it from an idea that honestly I had when I was thinking about my own egg freezing to the phase 3 clinical trial and already as an approved therapy in many parts of the world in like just under 4 years, which is unheard of in terms of the development timeline. And we're now hoping to bring our second asset in menopause to the clinic, right? And working with the agency to understand what is required for that. So I think like that is the big part of Gameto, why I say yes, like it's nice that we have a very clearly defined lead asset with strong proof of concept human data and early traction. But also, the benefit is that it is truly a company that has this override platform that allows you to, solve multiple conditions in a proprietary way, and then test different medications, test how even other drugs would affect female of childbearing age before you treat them in clinical trials, and potentially solve problems that we weren't able to solve previously. Because again, we just don't have enough human ovaries that can live for long enough in a lab for that to be useful.
There's so many different ways to go with questions on this because it is just so robust what you're creating. But let's go a little deeper on the Fertilo piece of it. And I know you had your first baby born in December through Fertilo, and you have multiple babies now, right?
Yes, that is correct. So maybe to just take a step back of what is Fertilo, I'm sure, people, Portfolia investors tend to be, highly educated on women's health. So most people are familiar with the IVF patient journey. And again, it was also a Nobel Prize, right? So Dr. Edwards, and it was a miracle of science. So for about just under 50 years, the IVF process has been pretty much exactly the same in terms of the female patient journey. The women, in order to get mature eggs outside of the body to be fertilized or frozen, right? Like up until this point, whether you do IVF or egg freezing, it is absolutely the same, undergoes about 2 weeks of hormone injections, normally twice daily hormone injections. The hormones sold today are either urine derived, so Menopur, for example, which just hit over 1 billion in sales last year, is derived from purified urine of menopausal women. That's why it's called Menopur, menopausal purified urine, where it's manufactured in Argentina. There are some that are recombinant, like gonal F, for example, but essentially it's either recombinant or urine-derived hormones from other women. That's what we use today. That's what women inject today in the United States and all over the world. So that causes a lot of side effects. It's a complicated, expensive, emotionally, physically draining journey. Most women experience side effects. About 1 in 3 end up with some degree of kind of hyperstimulation syndrome. And while the dangerous side effects are now we have treatments, right? So we don't have a lot of the dangerous complications that we've had before. It's still a very difficult journey, and on average women need to take about 3 cycles for a baby. That's kind of the median. So that compounds. It compounds in time taken off work, in compounds in visiting the clinic for blood work, for monitoring, even if you learn how to give your injections at home. And then several weeks of interrupted lifestyle, so bans on exercise, intercourse, and other aspects, right? So I'm sure anybody who has been, I have so far have not met a person who's been through the journey and said that they had a great time injecting, right? Like some people have a worse, some people have a better experience, but I have not yet met a person who said that was, the best part of their journey. Normally is, ultimately getting a baby. So what we do with Gameto, we try to simplify that process. We say like, that's great, and IVF has been a miracle of science, but it doesn't work so well for a lot of people. It is very long, complicated process, and it's contraindicated in certain high risk populations. If you're at risk of hormones, if you're at risk of clots, if you're at risk of certain cancers, if you don't have time to do it. So, and we say, why don't we bring this area of women's health to modern medicine? We already use some of this technology for treatments of cancer. We're investigating for diabetes, for neurology. So what we do in a kind of a with the fertilo cycle, we do a bit of a hybrid approach. So a woman, depending on her ovarian reserve, would have either an oral tablet, Clomid, and then usually up to two once daily dose of injections, plus minus a trigger shot. And then the eggs would be extracted and then co-cultured with fertilo in the vial in the laboratory. Actually, that is my background. So these are the eggs with, all of their layering, and then the cells that come out with them. And then these are the fertilo cells left in the co-culture. So what we do in the laboratory in that co-culture that is left kind of in the incubators in the lab, we mimic what happens right before ovulation in a healthy young ovary, because their cells are stem cell derived, they're epigenetically young. So it's almost like giving, every woman a young follicle, or, at the higher level, young ovary in a dish, helping with that maturation process. And what we are seeing right now in some early case series, so still very preliminary, is that for some women that are at the tail end of their reproductive lifespan, whose ovaries don't have that ability to mature it anymore, they can potentially get some mature eggs in the fertila system, because it's like a younger system, right? So after that, the eggs are then washed, everything is removed, and then as per standard of care, they can be frozen or fertilized. So Fertilo is now in phase 3 in the United States. We have over a dozen sites that are actively recruiting in California, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, New York. It's people can go on our website and then check all of the sites. We keep adding new sites. But for patients who are eligible and who want to get pregnant in the study, because our endpoint, our efficacy endpoint is clinical pregnancy at 12 weeks, they can access the product as part of the trial. So there are some obviously requirements for the trial, so it matches other IVF similar trials, but that's the way, that's how the product is currently in the United States as part of the phase 3 trial. And then, as you've said, it already received certain regulatory approvals and clearances in Australia, certain jurisdictions, Latin America. We got Japan, Singapore, and others. So in some of those places, we have started post-market clinical pilots. In Australia, that was with Virtus, the largest clinic, where we now have ongoing pregnancies. And we've had over 7 live births. We have over 20 ongoing pregnancies. That is something that is really exciting for us, because so far the evidence is very compelling, and we are also conducting some follow-up studies on seeing if this could be more effective for women with polycystic ovarian syndrome that are ongoing, because there was some early evidence of that, and then for other populations.
Mm-hmm. And so what are you seeing as far as, or what do you project, you know, births using the Fertilo system versus the traditional IVF process?
Well, I would just say, firstly, this idea of maturing eggs outside of the body is not new. So it's called that system, that process being called in vitro maturation, has been around for almost as long as IVF. There have been over documented 10,000 live births with IVM. There are FDA approved products for in maturing eggs outside of the body, but these are usually have been approved, without clinical trials, mostly as medical devices, because they're solutions, they're media, right? So historically, this in vitro maturation look like it's less effective, it's shorter, it's cheaper, but it's less effective than IVF. because you literally kind of let the eggs in this solution with some kind of nutrients, and then if it matures, great, and if it doesn't, well, that's pretty much it. And so what we know is that if you do get a good egg, and if you then end up getting a good embryo, and if you end up obviously having a healthy baby, there's no difference whether it's IVM or IVF, or like from that perspective. It's just that historically with IVM, the rates were lower. And that goes back to kind of our basic biology, why it's helpful for us to have these ovaries in a dish, because in that ovary in a dish, we also have immature eggs. And we know that immature eggs will not mature without these support cells. So that is a very important, and that is kind of the proprietary way, right? Like we have the patents, and we're the only people in the world so far that make these cells, and then have patents on kind of how do we release the criteria, how do we assay every vial for potency, for manufacturing. We were the first phase 3 in the United States from any induced pluripotent stem cell technology. This one just happens to be in women's health. So we set the precedent for good manufacturing practices in terms of stem iPSCs. And that's really our proprietary IP, is that how do we make, create, dose, manufacture, qualify, and bring these cells. And then, I think I saw a question on like business models. We sell these to clinics. So very similar to how embryo testing or any of these IVF media devices, treatments commercialize. This is, and then it can be reimbursed and either paid by the patient or their payers. But essentially, as long as you have the Fertilo cryovial and you have the basic equipment found in any embryology lab, you should be able to use the product. There's no additional equipment that people need, neither for the retrieval nor for the laboratory. And this has been used from, top clinics in the United States, Australia, to clinics in Peru where we had babies born, Argentina, Mexico. So very, very different labs, from kind of remote labs to more modern, high-tech labs with different equipment. So all of them were able to use the product with basic training of how to set up the co-culture, how to, do the dosing, but nothing in terms of specialized equipment, nothing that requires us to have it or build expensive laboratories or any weird shipping cycle. It's just this, we are a biotech company. We make the Fertilo cryovial, and we let the medical and clinical teams look after their patients.
Mm-hmm. So Jamie asks about the regulatory pathway, and are there unique things because of the newness of the process that's going to make that regulatory pathway different?
Well, we are in the final phase of trial for approval. So I guess like a couple of years ago, that was potentially not a problem, but when you're don't fall into any box, let's say interesting, right? So we were a little bit like AI companies, where we build the technology and then regulators need to catch up with us just without the AI valuations. And although we are technically an AI, we're doing artificial insemination. But jokes aside, it was a bit of a problem because some certain regulatory jurisdictions, because they were like, wait, you're not a drug because this doesn't go inside the body, but you're also not really like these devices and media because it's living cells. But then, we're not sure what you are. Like, let's just work for several years to design a legislation. And we were like, oh my God. Like we're a little startup. We don't have several years. So what we actually did, that's the reason why we have approvals across so many places. We were like, we're just going to go on a global tour, from our computers, obviously. And then we're going to see like, how is this regulated across jurisdictions? Because if we get stuck somewhere, at least, we'll get to others. We know this product works. We have very good data. We had great animal data. We had great human egg maturation embryo data. And that's why we got approved in certain markets, and we're still going for regulatory approval in others because of a difference in designation. So in the United States, we worked with the FDA and we got a designation of a biologic. So that's the same way as CAR T cell therapies are regulated, all of the cell and gene therapies are regulated, and that's why we needed to do a double-blind or randomized control trial that we're conducting right now. That was also the reason for us, doing the additional financing, because we wanted to have enough buffer. I mean, this is the largest trial ever conducted for in vitro maturation in the United States. Um, a lot of what we do in IVF today, or what, like a lot of the practices, there's very few randomized control trials. Like a lot of it is kind of off-label, bespoke. I mean, even this fact that IBM has been around for so long and nobody has done a double-blind randomized control trial. It's crazy, right? If you think about it, compare it to cardiology or some others, where every question you could think about, there's a nicely worded, clinical trial in New England Journal of Medicine. So it is a large trial. I think it's a huge advancement for reproductive medicine. It is the first trial of stem cell technology in the United States. We hope to be the first iPSC product to be approved for clinical use, and certainly the first one for IVF and women's health. And the that so therefore there's no more regulatory uncertainty, right? Like we're in the final registrational trial. We know what we're applying for. We'll be submitting for BLA once the trial is recruited. So far, our recruitment has been incredibly strong, actually. We haven't even started the marketing push, and because there was no need. Literally, as soon as the trial opened, the clinics were flooded. We're now looking to add a few more clinics to try and accommodate for the demand. I hope this continues. Obviously, this has to continue for another 6 months or so at least for us to be able to recruit everyone. Obviously, there's certain selection criteria when you're doing the phase 3 trial, as I mentioned. I mean, people need to want to get a baby within 6 months, right? You need to transfer the embryo immediately because, as I mentioned, our efficacy endpoint is at pregnancy at 12 weeks. And then we follow through live birth for safety, and then the mother to postpartum 6 weeks checkup. But once we have that data, we will be submitting it to the FDA for approval. And then in the jurisdictions where we are approved, they basically said, well, you are reproductive tissue or you are a device, and therefore the level of evidence required was what we've already had or what we were able to get faster, right? Like maybe a smaller clinical trial, which we have conducted and followed to live birth, but not the same double-blind RCT that we're conducting in the United States.
Mm-hmm. So there's still a number of questions, but I'd like to switch gears a little bit, and we will hopefully have more time at the end for some of these. But let's talk about the amino part of this, the amino part, the menopause part of your platform. Are we going to be able to choose to go into menopause or not? What's
Well,
the
I think
children?
like I'd love to under promise and over deliver, so I don't think I can have an answer for that yet. But what I can say though is that I think for me as like when I was learning about this as a female physician scientist, right, like entrepreneur, I think what was shocking is that menopause is not really just loss of reproductive capacity, right? It has an effect on our entire bodies, right?
Everything.
It's pre-menopause, we're kind of protected from all health conditions, and then after menopause, we start developing all these conditions. And for the vast majority of them, if you understand the kind of the pathophysiology, right, it's very connected to the loss of these hormones and that signaling. So I think like for us, it's just really interesting to see, okay, what can we do to improve the health of women and all of the symptoms that occur. I think like the big part of Gameto is we only build products that we want to use ourselves, right? Like if we don't think we'd use it for ourselves, for our sisters, mothers, friends, we don't want to build these products. So we take into account even symptoms that maybe certain physicians or pharma companies would take it, oh, well, not really relevant because it's not life-threatening. And I think when we think about menopause, we were fortunate enough that last year we won 10 million non-dilutive funding from the ARPA-H for this program. And that really helped us in a reasonably tough kind of biotech markets to be able to expand the pipeline without using venture dollars that obviously, over the last few years wasn't the best time for biopharma, in which like their good companies were always able to raise, but at a very high cost of capital, right? So what we were able to do with that, we were one of the two largest grants out of 1,700 applicants that involved both companies as well as academic universities across the globe, right? So this was not limited just to the United States and entities, and was to bring our amino program. And in the kind of menopause pipeline, we essentially have two product candidates. The first one is a vaginal ring that contains all of the hormones that are actually lost when we stop making them during menopause with the ovaries, and then at a more personalized dosing that is linked more to kind of um, that is more physiological. So it's not just looking at estrogens, but also the progesterone, as well as testosterone, and then inhibins that are very important to play in the negative feedback loop between the brain and the ovary, which disruption then leads to a lot of the downstream consequences. And then the other kind of more of a moonshot thing that we have in that bucket is literally a cell-based implant. So it does carry still certain scientific risks that we're looking to de-risk, but essentially taking these ovarian support cells that make all of the hormones that in our ovaries, and putting them into an implant that can go here underneath the arm, and then these, not that you have to load these hormones and peptides into a vaginal ring, but you actually just add the cells in this implant, more similar to the progesterone contraceptive implant, and they make all of the hormones in a personalized way already, responding to the signals in the brain. So if you and I put it, they would produce different doses responding to our physiology, and they would react, if you take a long flight, or, you don't, whatever, you have a sleepless night, or you do a lot of exercise and so forth. Now, where we are right now, actually, I think we are really excited that this FDA has been very vocal about menopause. I think though, we have seen a lot of finally, like I think from the regulatory side, because for a lot of time it was very hard to get through regulatory for menopause, because people were like, why should you think about menopause as anything to treat? It's very natural. And while it is, right, like we don't want to over medicalize anybody who doesn't need things. But I think like the data is compelling that a lot of women end up suffering with, not only side effects during the perimenopausal transition, but also conditions like osteoporosis, vaginal dryness, painful intercourse, painful urination, and loss of lean muscle mass, and multiple others that are directly linked. So we want to provide better treatments for patients who think that they want relief from those symptoms. So they have actually made it clear that they're more open. They've been trying to remove some of the black warnings from even the existing HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And we're preparing for a meeting with the regulator to understand, how some of these treatments could be regulated, what the data that would be necessary to bring it to clinic, and are hoping to bring the menopause asset to the clinic in the foreseeable future. But essentially, the goal would be is that our treatment is per se is not going to restore anyone's reproduction beyond menopause, and obviously what's needed for a healthy pregnancy is way beyond even just ovaries, right? But the idea is that you would not have the symptoms, and you could delay that hormonal drop, make it a lot more gradual, and then compress these chronic conditions that develop after menopause. So instead of developing them, at 50 or 51, which is the median age of menopause, you could start developing them for maybe like, 70. And then that means, you're not frail at 80, you're frail at 90, right? So that's, I think, like a huge potential that we're really excited about, but also just like general lifestyle symptoms from these hot flashes, mental health conditions, as well as we've talked about, like a lot of women, still end up experiencing things that shouldn't happen, like a painful urination or painful intercourse, right? Simply because of the loss of hormones. So that's really something we hope to address. It is a very difficult thing to build. It's sometimes scary because unlike IVF, which is it's a bit of a niche market for pharma, but it's a highly there it's a high cash market. There's a lot of expenditure. Um, Menopause, again, we're building the field as we're building the solution. The payment systems are not clear. It's not clear, how this ends up being build these solutions because hormone replacement therapy is very cheap. There's not much data. It's not ubiquitously used. How do you run trials for these other conditions? These are longer, larger trials. How do you get that much capital that has never been devoted to women's health? How do you model the return on something that has never been done before? So I'd say like the issue around menopause is that it's harder to solve problems, like that never been solved before without like amazing comps. But I think like some of the examples I like to use is weight loss. I mean, when I was in medical training and even a young doctor, was an undruggable therapeutic area. Like people thought that's not something you deal with pharma. They were like, no, if you want to do surgery, I mean, other than like very bad drugs that made you poop really poorly and like vomit, like there was nothing. And there was it was just people thought it's not a pharma problem, like it's not going to happen. And then now it turned out very quickly as one of the hottest areas compared to neurology and cancer. So I do think women's health has a similar potential. But it's going to be like that's going to be a very tough battle. And it's going to require a few wins in the field. And I think that's also how we played it. Fertilo is a nice first play and first asset because it's simpler and shorter to bring to market, and it's operating in a lot more established supply chain, right? You're saying, well, look, all these hormone injections are pretty much all the same, and they're already 6 billion. They're going to be 10 billion market by the end of the decade, like, which is just a couple of years after my approval, and I have 20 years of patents and 12 years of biologic protection. A lot of people won't want to inject. A lot of people medically don't want to inject. For some people, I'm going to be more effective. So you just take percentage of the market share. Whereas here, it's something that's, oh my God, this could be so much bigger, but it's harder to quantify.
And just so important for us to be there. So if you need foot soldiers, we've got thousands of women across the country, many that are in either perimenopause or have been through menopause, that are there because it's all about our health span, and that makes such a difference, as we age. But you did mention cancer, and there is that third leg really of what you're doing, and it's really creating that laboratory, right, to be able to test different solutions for, I think, ovarian cancer you're looking at. Tell us a little more about Diovo.
Yeah, so the ova is really how we call it, like, everything else that falls into these organoid platform. And it's more around, as I mentioned, like the right now to treat a woman of childbearing age, so anybody who is not past menopause, you would test a drug into 2 generations of rats. So if these rats can reproduce, you're going to give it to women. And that also leads to underrepresentation of women in clinical trials, even when there is a genuine push to do it, because there's always a fear of harm. And I think the ability of our platform, and again, we're seeing in some of the recent years by the FDA push to try and incorporate some of these more novel organoids into drug testing, is that we could provide a service where through our ovary platform, even an unrelated drug where you want to test for women for heart attack treatments, and you want to recruit women, see how would this affect her reproductive life, and then you do that in addition to rats. There's certain things you will always need potentially animal testing for, but there's certain things that they're not good at if their organs are not the same as ours, and that's certainly the case with the reproductive system. Beyond that, I think what it allows us, right, like the main thing is that like we don't have enough ovaries, right? Like we never had them enough for research. We don't have them enough women for life, right? Like they were made when we were still in our mother's tummy, right? But we were embryos, and then they basically once by the time we want to use them in our mid-30s, they're already like less in terms of the egg count, and then at menopause they like fail us completely, right? So this has just been a light motive, I'd say. There's just not enough functional ovaries. And what that allows us, it allows us to now then study conditions that affect ovaries or that interact with ovaries. So for example, endometriosis is, and the uterus. So historically, again, we have no ways to make human ovaries in a lab. So we just look at the uterus, but we miss the ovarian component, which is the one that controls the cyclicality of the condition. Similarly, for ovarian cancer, we've looked at the cancer cell lines. But what is actually happens is that in an ovarian cancer, you have a cancer cell line and you have a healthy ovarian tissue, and it's both, right? So suddenly you can now say, okay, I'm gonna have part of it that's gonna be a cancer line, but the rest is not gonna be. And I'm gonna look how this cancer line eats through the rest of the ovary, and I'm gonna prevent it from doing that. So I think like what is really exciting is that if if we hopefully and we're certainly really laser focused on getting Fertila approved in the United States. We're conducting one of the largest trials in the field, certainly the largest one in IVM so far. So our team is very lean. We're still a small company. I mean, 130 million is not that much for biopharma and for clinical trials that cost north of $50 million. But the idea is that there is a lot of potential, and we're starting to see a lot more pharma inbound. And then I think with a more success of Fertilo and just like more advancement into the field, we'll also be able to partner for some of these other assets, and help that our IP solves potentially some of these other problems.
Mm-hmm. It's so exciting. I mean, just the breadth of everything that you're looking at here and how it can impact us in the future. Dina, as we're looking at a number of these questions you've handled as we've been going through, um, so if there's any that you'd like to pick out there, one, Adriana asks about, could this impact the cost of egg freezing going forward? It's so expensive right
Yeah, well, we still cannot comment on the pricing, and pricing differs on the jurisdictions because we set the final price post approval. But yes, the goal is that there's a lot of cost cutting that can, happen in the injections. There's some added cost in the laboratory for the co-culture. But the goal is that over time, this treatment should make it more accessible. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then a very personal one. One of our members wants to know, is this available in the UK? Can I get into a study
Uh,
or
Not yet. We've been trying because they said that they're separate. We are obviously working with European medicines agencies on EU approval. But we're in conversations, but it's not available in the UK. I think the best way to find where it is available, which clinics and which jurisdictions, is our website. So we keep that pretty up to date. And obviously, again, as a lean company, we sometimes obtain regulatory approvals, but we don't launch immediately. And that is really because of kind of sequencing everything. And then again, after getting more ahead with our phase 3, submitting the data package that we hope to submit soon. So it's just kind of balancing out. We've had a lot of pharma interest for licensing the product for jurisdictions, but licensing in this stage tended to be that we give them a lot of the upside. And whereas once we have US approval, hopefully, or more advanced there, then that allows us to launch on better terms, whether solo or partner. So I think like when we think about markets, we look at regulatory approval, but also the how to best sequence it, right? And sometimes partnering is a small biotech, which is funding a large trial, is not necessarily giving you the best upside for the next 10 20 years of the commercial sales, and that's all the things we have to take into account.
Mhm.
So we had to reject some pharma term sheets, is kind of where I'm going at. But maybe if one amazing comes, we will consider at some point.
There's a couple of questions that are asking about, you did get a DARPA-H non-dilutive grant, which is wonderful. Are there concerns that, some of the research that's being done around women or reproductive health might be being pulled back a little bit in the US? Or do you see, other resources I know some of the big foundations are stepping forward. Any concerns about that?
Yeah, well, I think like I think it's important to separate like, what affects Gameta and then what are my personal concerns and beliefs. And I think in terms of the company, all of our research has been funded by the company, except that ARPA H grant. Some of the positives that have happened that have helped us are really, I mean, this is the first time that the FDA has decided that menopause is a topic that should be solved and that we have to remove black labels and that we have to talk about HRT and we have to talk about vaginal dryness and that they want to meet with us early on to see how we bring menopause products to the clinic, right? Like there's certain meetings that are very difficult to get granted, and we got them with this new FDA because of their interest in menopause. So that is very helpful. I would lie if I said otherwise. Similarly, I think it was helpful to have the IVF executive order to shut down speculations that any administration will have an impact for IVF, which, as we know, does have the support of the majority. And I think it should not be very controversial that people should be able to build families and have children when they wish to do so. So from that perspective, as of now, we're not seeing any negative aspects on Gamito. There obviously has been, it's been a pretty rough few months for biopharma with some like announcements here and there and things that are changing, but a lot of it started even prior with kind of assets coming from China and people looking at, should we be funding US biopharma if everything can be done cheaper? So if I have to say like what worries me, it worries me like, like what if somebody like starts building like my vaginal ring there and like, with my IP that's protected and so there's loads of things that started hurting the industry before and then there were some other punches since that have not helped. But on the other hand, they've helped with, easier recruitment and others. So I'd say we're not in a rosy time for biopharma. Personally, as a physician scientist that loves and is interested in women's health, I'd love to see that continue to be recognized and obviously have a basic research funding for that because that again helps the field. But it doesn't at this point, have immediate negative consequences for the research we're doing right now in the company that threatens our operations at scale.
Mm-hmm. There's a number of other questions, but I know we just have another minute or so to go. A number of, as you know, I mean, 11% of women, I think is the estimate, have endometriosis, you have PCOS, and people are talking about different issues with that. But it appears that at least this may be a part of a solution or lessen the negative impacts on women with their fertility with what you're doing. Is there anything else you can add to that, Dina?
Yeah, well, I think it should be an easier way. It should help certain people who cannot get pregnant with current IVF. I think egg freezing was mentioned. That for me is very exciting. We always had contraception as like the first act of how not to get pregnant, and then egg freezing came about as the only and the most effective way to give yourself a few more years to, have and build a family and do everything else that women may want to. But the process is very difficult, right? And it's much harder when you're doing it and funding it by yourself. And you're not even going to get a baby immediately, right? So it's often done on kind of the balance of risks and benefits. Do I use my pay time off and do I use my like few weeks and I will be bruised and look like I'm in the third trimester of pregnancy, but I'm a single woman and I have this job and like even women with benefits end up not using it or doing it once and some like are not able to do it and repeat it in enough times. So I think like with Fertila, I do believe that potentially can be that second act to contraception because it makes it easier for women to do. If something you can do over a long weekend and you don't need to take 6 weeks off your favorite burpees or intercourse, and you don't have to do this, and you don't have to take this much time off work, then why not? Because if you ask any woman, right, like, if I was thinking, with my son and my daughter, like I'd love my daughter to freeze her eggs, but I want her to feel good, right? Like if it's a current process, I'm not sure if I tell her, I'd be like, well, see, and then if you're not, maybe do it. But if it's like something you can do over a long weekend, I'd be like, well, you just do it and hopefully you never need to use them, right? Like you have them as a you have them as some kind of like a potential backup. So I do think that is very interesting. And I think I do think women deserve to have that, right? Particularly because as we think about, this game of gametogenesis, which is how gameto came about, of again making gametes or sex cells, that's gametogenesis, is men do make sperm throughout life, and we all of ours were made, and that's it before we're born. So I think that's a potentially a really powerful implication of this technology long term that I'm personally very excited about.
So, Dina, last question. We are Portfolia investors are there's over 2,000 in all 50 states and 20 countries. I saw a couple of our friends that were in the National Institutes of Aging that were on. What can we do to help you, to support you? We're so excited to be a part of your journey. We're here. Is there anything that where we can add value to you and to your work now?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, firstly, thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to me. I think like what is very helpful always is to disseminate the information. And again, all of our publications, research, the phase 3 trial, the rigor that the science has been built. One of the difficulties, again, in building in women's health biotech is there's just not many companies. This has not been done before. There are not many great winners. So there's a lot of stuff on the consumer side, but not on the scientific side. So I think like spreading the word that we are trying to do really rigorous science, the publications, the team, the company, that would be the most helpful right now, and that this is meaningful. I think those are the two that are the most important, because of the lack of successes in one biopharma. There's not a single like what publicly traded women's health biopharma like doing well right now, right? Most large pharma companies don't have women's health divisions, right? So that leaves like an empty space, and therefore people come with preformed biases and maybe too much skepticism. And I think saying, okay, well, there's more here. I believe that is it. I think that is very interesting, and I think that should help the field and everybody else working in the field, from basic research to commercial, in this space.
Yes. And friends, Dina won't be able to be with us in New York at our Women's Health Summit because she has a new baby coming in the next month. So
Yeah, I saw your question of like what keeps you up at night, and I was like, well, if I'm gonna be fully honest, it's my reflux because I'm 34 weeks pregnant. Uh, and then all of the founders' problems. But yeah, I found out it was interesting during this fundraise that I was pregnant with a baby girl, and I was that really changed how I thought about the fundraise because, as you know, we had term sheets from investors, but we also had a term sheet from pharma. And we were at the crossroad where it was like, do we give the product away now or do we continue building it? And a lot of my thinking was, like, okay, if I want my daughter to really be able to freeze her eggs with this, like, what do I think is more likely to get us there? And ultimately, the answer was to stick with it for longer and try to go through further for longer. So that's what we decided to do, obviously not just because of that, but also like thorough analysis with advisors and the board. But yes, definitely it was a kind of an emotional thing for me during this fundraising process.
it's exciting. I just said earlier on a meeting, oh my gosh, we have so many pregnant CEOs. And then I had to add the footnote, said no other VC on Sand Hill Road ever. So it's something we're very proud of.
Yeah, well, like our company, I mean, our lead asset is to help women have children. So if I believe that it's impossible to have children and do other things in life, I think it would be a bit hypocritical. So, we believe in, we want to give more people to be able to do so.
We are so proud and pleased to be able to be a part of your journey, to be able to have invested and continue to invest in your company. And friends, if you've not yet invested in the Women's Health Fund 4, this is the time to do it. And this is why we do it together, because our money, even small amounts put together, can really make a difference in our lives, our children's lives, and even that 4-year-old granddaughter of mine. We're changing the world with our money. And Dina, thank you. Thank you so much. And
Thank you
we'll
for
see you
having
all
me. It was a pleasure.
soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.